Good evening. Everybody hear me okay? Way in the back, my compatriots all the way back there. All right, good. Yeah, further back so I can't hear you when you're heckling me would be great. Hi, everybody. My name is Tim. I am from the company of Vectra, as I think has been mentioned. We make this guy, Cognito, as well as a couple of other products that the guys in the back would be happy to talk to you about too. We also just opened an office in Dublin about a month ago, 6 weeks. What's that? European headquarters as of tomorrow. And European headquarters as of tomorrow. Few hours apparently. See, hot off the presses. So we are a network security company. We make a network appliance that will keep track of potential intrusions and other malicious activity inside your network. I'll keep this brief so that it's not too much of a marketing thing, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it as well. We also have some swag over there. We're not an official sponsor, but there's some fidget spinners, which everybody likes. Even if you don't think you're going to like fidget spinners, you're going to find yourselves using it all the time, I promise. Pens, little webcam covers, stuff like that, so feel free to help yourselves. I am from our office in Austin, Texas, which is way down there, decent plane ride away from here. Not at all like the rest of Texas, so if you're worried about like any number of things that we won't go into for political reasons, probably not me. As you can tell, I don't necessarily fit the stereotype. So anyway, today I am here to talk to you about Electron. How many of you have heard of Electron before? All right, well, cool. I guess my work here is done, so see you guys next month. So I'll probably skip over some of the basics of it, but we will talk a little bit more in depth about Electron specifically. So overall, Electron is a combination of the Chromium project, so think of it like the open source version of Chrome, specifically its rendering engine, so a lot of the HTML, CSS type stuff, as well as Node.js. And so squishing both of those together, you actually get the opportunity to make a native app that runs on PCs, Macs, Linux, that kind of thing. But it has, at its core, JavaScript. So you may have actually already been using some Electron apps. So I've got a couple down here. I use Atom from GitHub. Any fans of Atom out there? All right, good stuff. Visual Studio Code, also very popular. IDE. Really? Okay. Also made with Electron. This is a great app called Hyper. It's a terminal written in Electron. I really love it. For the moment, our company is using Rocket Chat for its chat, also Electron. Yeah, and then the next one we're shifting to is Microsoft Teams, but interestingly enough, Slack, HipChat, Microsoft Teams, all Electron apps. So like this is everywhere. Lots of people are using it. There are mail clients, there are REST clients, there's a screen capture program, all of these things written in Electron. So tons and tons of opportunity there. We'll talk about some of the benefits in a moment. Again, so to continue from before, it's JS in the middle, and of course if JavaScript runs on it, that means we can get Ember to run on it, which is what this is all about. So to get started, as you might expect with Ember, it's a super complicated process, will probably take you all day, and involves these three things. So start an Ember app. There's a fantastic add-on called Ember Electron. Just install that, and then run Ember Electron, and actually that's it. Now, I have some stuff prepared from earlier. I did a couple of tests with this. I'm not sure if it's Wi-Fi or whatever, but the NPM install actually takes a bit. So I'm going to run an existing app that I have created instead of trying to make a new one. So I have here a wonderfully named folder called Ember Electron Test. So let me make this a little bit bigger for you. You guys see that in the back? Except for the very back row, because I don't care about you guys. All right, so opening this up in Atom here. Cool, that worked. We'll zoom in on that a little bit later. But back here, so I'm just going to run Ember Electron. E is my alias for Ember. And we'll let this run. Give it just a second. And got a new icon down there. You can't see it well on this TV, but it's got the little Electron icon in it. And here we go. We've got an Ember app. So this is really all you need to do. Literally all I've done with this repo is ran Ember init, Ember install, Ember Electron, and then Ember Electron. Like that's all I've done up to this point. So it looks like a normal browser. If you've done anything with Ember recently, you've probably recognized the welcome page. But we have a title bar. See, it's native. But everything else is not. So everything inside of here is JavaScript. And I can prove it to you by opening up DevTools. So this is normal Chrome DevTools. We can actually use the normal inspectors in here, take a look at the DOM. We can move things around if we need to, just like we can in any other web browser. Because it's full Chrome DevTools, you may notice up here, we have the Ember inspector. So it also runs inside here. Now, one thing that I've noticed is the first time you run it, it doesn't think that it's an Ember app, so just Command-R to refresh, and there you go, full Ember tools right here. So everything that you've come to expect from the fantastic Ember Dev tools, and if you haven't used them, I encourage you to, right here in Electron. There's one other tool that actually is included with this that is pretty fantastic called Devtron. It's super hard to see, but it's right here next to Ember up here. This gives you some insight into what's going on the Node side, the Chromium side, the native-ish side of this. So for example, one common one that I tend to use is this accessibility one. Let me see if I can make those bigger. Yeah, there we go. So accessibility does your normal accessibility testing with an audit of your application. So just run the audit, and then you see all kinds of failures and warnings, seem super severe. So I guess the moral is don't release the Ember welcome page as your Electron app. Probably not a good idea. But you can see all kinds of things that you can do to fix the accessibility in your app. This is actually a little more important than on the web because people have come to expect better accessibility from native desktop apps than they tend to on the web. So just be aware if you are releasing an Electron app, try to account for some of the accessibility. This is actually part of Electron itself, not Ember Electron, so you can run this even if you decide not to use Ember. A couple of other things that it's got, you can look at the require graph. So if you've got a fairly complex set of dependencies on your node side, this will build up a nice graph for you so you can see how all of those things interact. There's also some basic linting. Now it's not like JavaScript lint, it's more of a app level lint. So you can see it says things like, am I listening for any crashes and doing something about it? This is also saying I'm not using the newest version of Electron. It will let you know that, as well as there's a thing called a SAR archive, which is just another way of packaging your app, which we'll talk about a little later. And so it gives you all kinds of information like that for making sure that your app is ready to be deployed. Obviously, other than that, normal stuff that you'd expect from dev tools like the console. It's trying to grab something right now. I'm assuming it's probably a guest Wi-Fi issue. You can open up your normal source mapped stuff here. Let me open up. I think this is messed up for me. There we go. Do I still have my things in here? No. Normally there's some of the default Ember things in here. Maybe it moved it up here. Nah. It does support source maps. I probably don't have those configured properly because again, all I did was just run the three commands. But you can still come in here, set breakpoints, restart the app, do all of the normal things that you would expect from a browser because effectively, this is a browser, just a very restricted set of URLs that it goes to. Questions up to this point? Yes?
Does it live reload like regular?
It absolutely does. Excellent question. So the question was, does it live reload? So let me jump in here to the code, and I apologize for the small size. There we go. That's a little bit better. So if I come in here and let's just say, comment out this and put yay, and that's probably not going to work because it's not on the same screen. There we go. Okay. Just so you know, I'm not like making anything up. So I'm save and live reload. So same kind of stuff. The usual expert dev tooling that you've probably come to expect from Ember. So yeah, great question. Other questions? Yes.
If you ship this app, can you make it so people can't open the Chrome inspector?
Yes. Yes, there's definitely a way to disable that. In fact, if you try with things like Slack, you can't. But if you try with things like Rocket Chat, you can, because Rocket Chat lets you provide custom CSS So it's actually a great way to kind of poke around the DOM that they've created, add your own custom CSS, and customize it for your company. So it's definitely a powerful tool if you know that your target audience is predominantly developers. Maybe it's okay to leave it on, but yeah, you can definitely disable that. One other notable exception to disabling it is Atom itself. If you haven't done this, definitely just pop open DevTools here inside of Atom. There's tons of awesome, cool stuff here as well. So I actually, whenever I find an app that looks like it might be Electron at all, I'll try to open up DevTools just in case. There have been a couple of situations where they haven't disabled the DevTools, so definitely check that out. And you know, at some point, especially if it's just offline only, like they're shooting themselves in the foot. But also, always a good idea to think about, you know, whether that kind of thing is appropriate for the users. Other questions? Yes.
Sorry, are you limited to the same kind of hardware interfaces as a browser, or is it possible to hook into the lower level OS hardware?
That is a fantastic question. I promise he's not a plant because we're actually going to talk about that right now. So excellent transition. Okay, yeah, the question was, what was the next slide? No, the question was how to interact with lower level APIs, basically, right? Because Electron runs in Node, you have access to a lot of the APIs that Node would afford you. Normally, when you are working in an Ember application, you interact with an API of some kind. So this could be a server, anything like that. This actually doesn't change that much with Electron. So what you do instead is you interact directly with Electron using the same kind of request-response async format that you're probably used to working with the web. And it does this through in-process communication, or IPC. The reason I bring that up is that's what Node or Electron calls it in its APIs. So let me give you an example of that. There's two components to this. One is IPC main, which runs in your Node application. The other one is IPC renderer, which runs, in this case, this would be your Ember application. If it's not Ember, it's whatever is sort of running your client side, if you will. So in order to get this to work, you need two parts as well on the implementation. So this is going to be our main, again, on the Node side. You import your IPC main, and then just like any other evented system, you do .on, provide a name for the event, and then you get an argument for the event itself, as well as any arguments that might have been passed to it. At that point, you can send a reply right away, do any other sort of asynchronous work, and then move on with your day. Now, the Ember side looks very, very similar, but instead, you're actually listening for the reply. And in this case, we're just doing a simple console log. And then you're emitting the event with render.send. So you may notice Ember request here matches with Ember request on the listener on your main, and then it sends the Electron reply, which the IPC renderer is listening for, and will then execute the callback. So at this point, basically what you've got is access to almost any sort of Node library or plugin or anything that you might need to use. There are a couple of limitations with Node libraries that require native extensions. You have to do some bindings on some of the header files there. There's documentation on the Electron website if you need to use one of those APIs. Otherwise, it's as simple as npm install and then doing a require on it. All right. So one example of that is reading from files and directories. So in this case, basically most of this is standard Node if you've worked with that. We're going to import the readdir function, which is async. So when we get a request for get files, we're going to do the readdir, provide a callback, and then send the files back. So fairly straightforward stuff. Very, again, callback utilizing, but you can always do some promises and stuff like that. Before we move on to the next section, we can take a super quick break so everyone can get some pizza. And then I'll pick it up in just a minute or two.
There's some vegetarian ones as well, if anybody's vegetarian.
While that's going on, does anyone have any questions? See, this is what happens. I don't have pizza yet, and the mine's just completely gone. Does anyone have any questions on accessing any of the native parts with Node or anything else like that?
What sort of
Sure, sure. So what does the landscape of native APIs look like effectively? So a lot of that, surprisingly, you can actually do with the web already. Like as a browser app, you can request access to the camera. Electron can forward those requests to the operating system, so you get a more native-looking request dialog for things like the camera. Playing audio, very similar. Electron's APIs specifically are a little bit limited to mostly just dealing with the window itself, so positioning the window, resizing it, that kind of thing. But beyond that, anything you can do with Node, by and large, you can do with Electron. So you mentioned file system access specifically. You can definitely save files in the same way that you would with a Node app. Kind of like this example, instead of reading from a directory, you could easily write to a file on the file system as well. So I say mostly because there's two big constraints here. One I mentioned with any Node packages that require specific versions of Node or of operating system like header files. Be aware of those, and there's a list of those on the Electron site. The other big part of that is actually not technical or hardware-based necessarily, but it's sort of a user experience thing. Be aware of potential attack vectors using some of these frameworks. You definitely don't want to do blanket script injection, for example, into your Ember app, because in one case you might be able to toast somebody's browser, but at this point you have direct file system access, so you could really do some nasty things with it. So be aware of the packages that you're loading in. Follow standard due diligence as if you were running it on any kind of Node server. Check out the versions. Make sure that to the best of your ability you understand what's going on, whether it's going to shoot you in the foot, any security concerns, that sort of standard library type of stuff. But beyond those two, you've got access to anything else in Node. And then again, a couple of specific APIs for things like the window. There's a couple of others that I didn't mention. You can create menu bar items for the Mac and Windows. You can create tray icons. Notifications are another one that it has built-in support for. So you send a notification similarly to how you do it in like the web API for notifications. And Electron figures out how to transform that into something that Windows knows how to show, Linux knows how to show, Mac OS knows how to show, that kind of thing. Recently, actually, a newer version of Electron has beta support for Touch Bar Macs, which is super cool. They've got a super cute example. They've basically made a small slot machine for your touch bar, so you can do some basic gambling and just right there on your touch bar while you're trying to do some work. So there's some cute examples, but they demonstrate the power of Electron. I will say, though, that is one limitation. If there are new APIs, so touch bar is a perfect example. The Electron team didn't have a version out that could do touch bars as soon as these things were released. There was a little bit of a delay. So if you're trying to get latest and greatest, this may not be the best framework for you, but at the same time, they were able to catch up pretty quickly. And so the touch bar API came very soon, and you could start using that today, actually. So great question. Left first.
And just going back to the camera example, I suppose you could argue that this is like a higher privilege on a web page. The way that signals like Chromium to say, don't ask the user for permission if I want to access these particular features, right? Mm-hmm. Is that something you can do?
So the question was for things like cameras, is there a way to not necessarily ask the user for permission every time? Among other things, basically. Some of it is cached, so it is still sort of a browser. So when you get the little, are you allowed to use the camera thing, you can say yes, and then the next time you request it, it will be there. That same permission will apply. Anything beyond that, if you want less of a bother, let's say the user's just opted not to request access for that sort of thing, check out some of the native APIs on the Electron site. They may have a way for you to sort of bypass that. And there may be also some other APIs that are more relevant than just the camera example too, like some of the file system access stuff, but great question. Yes?
Yeah, sorry, I was just wondering about the interface with Node. Does that all happen on the same event loop as a UI, or is that like, is it a separate, essentially say you're trying to do threading in any kind of way, or is it all blocking?
Gotcha. So the question is the Node process basically operating on the same thread as the UI process? And they are not. They are on two separate ones. It's part of the reason why some of the async event handling stuff is going on. For more details on that, definitely check out the Electron site. They've got a great deal of information on how this whole thing came about, how they designed their current architecture. There's also I guess it's kind of a competing project called Node WebKit that I actually used a long time before Electron was out that does some of the similar things, and so they've also got some documentation on how they build that stuff up. But yeah, they are at least on separate enough that they won't be blocking, hence the async nature. Great questions. Anything else? All right, cool. So let's move on to packaging, because at some point you want to take your fantastic Ember welcome page app and ship it out to the world. Please don't do that. At least name it something different. Ember Hello would be fine. Inside of Electron is used a project called Electron Forge. And Electron Forge was designed specifically to package and release Ember apps in Ember Electron. So it has a fantastic config that you can look at some more examples of on the site. But the important parts here are, first of all, this stuff down here, the Electron packager config, super easy to say, here's what your name of the product is, copyright information. The icons are very important to me. I'm like kind of obsessed with some icons. So usually I have an icon for one of these projects before I even have a line of code written. But maybe not the best long-term strategy. But this is where you do things like define icons. Also, if you have specific other resources for things like notifications, Windows especially has different types of icons based on whether your app is added to the taskbar or one of the tile views. So you can define different things there. More importantly, probably for this talk at this point, is up above. So this is where you actually tell it how to deploy your application. So when you run a command that we'll see in just a moment, this is the way to say, these are the platforms that I want to deploy for. So in this example, we're going to create a Debian file, and we're going to create a zip file for the Mac, which just has a .app file in it. Excuse me. You can also do Windows at this point. Linux supports 2 or 3 different types of output files. Mac OS supports a DMG file as well as a zip file or the plain .app file. Windows has a few more options, whether you want to do like a Windows Store app or just something that you can let people download. So all of those are different options for these, have different configuration values, all kinds of stuff like that. But all of it comes down to yet another extremely complex, horribly tedious to type Ember command, Ember Electron make. So let's actually have a demo of that real quick. All right, so here we are on this one, still running. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this one out. I'm going to type Ember Electron make, and I'm going to cheat because I only have one hand. And we'll let this do its thing. Normally this is pretty quick. Don't try to do this on a plane, as it turns out, because it does try to download and cache some runtime components, and plane Wi-Fi does not like you. All right, should be done pretty quickly. So you can see it does actually find some native dependencies, which is why if you have node libraries that use specific versions of those, be aware of that. And making the Electron project now. This is usually what I do is I talk to myself and just read out all of the stuff that the Ember console gives me. All right, so if I open this at this point, I'm going to try this. We'll see if this works. Oh, yes. Does it work on that screen? All right, fantastic. Cool, so here's our folder here. We now have a new file called Electron out. And if I open this, then we've got a couple of different folders in here. So this one is our Ember test Darwin x64. It's got the app itself. So we could run this right now, execute it, deploy it anywhere that we might want to. We also have the stuff here in make, where we have this DMG for the Mac. And then we've got a zip file as well for the Mac there also. And then a couple of other dependencies here if we want to sort of look around into what it actually spits out into the build. So at this point, you can take this thing, put it up on your CDN for people to download, and then they'll be able to download it, install it. It even includes kind of a basic, hold on, give me a second. There we go. A basic one of those cute little drag and drop interface things. This is customizable, but I've seen some just really adorable ones where it's got all kinds of cartoons and cool stuff there that basically means take this thing, drag it over there, and then forget that you ever saw this. But again, icons and splash screens like this are kind of my thing. But anyway, so that's that, and then we can actually run this directly from here, and you'll see there's our yay, because we replaced the Ember welcome page. So at this point, we haven't really done anything to disable the functionality. There were some questions about the dev tools, so everything else is the same. I can still open up dev tools at this point. Actually, it looks like I didn't. Oh, cool. All right, well, in that case, what I meant to say was, because we have deployed this, it is disabled turning on the dev tools. That actually used to be the default, was that you could turn on the dev tools, but I guess I haven't used the packager in a couple of versions. So right now we've got a fully featured Electron app, icons down there, runs like a normal desktop app. It just happens to be an Ember app instead. All right, so let's shift back over here. So what we've seen up to this point is we just get files, right? And you can absolutely copy those up to some server, let people download them. A lot of Electron apps do this. But you can also deploy to some stores. There are detailed instructions on the Electron site, but Electron supports deployment to both the Windows Store and the App Store. Basically, if you have an App Store account on either platform, add your API keys, add your certificates, and it will give you compiled binaries that you can then upload to these two stores. Apple uses iTunes Connect. I will admit that I haven't built anything for the Windows Store in a while, so I don't know what the current flow is for that one. But the iTunes, at least, you upload the file. It can take care of it from there, make sure that everything's at least kosher as far as the App Store submission guidelines are concerned. And then you can release it, sell it, whatever you need to do with that one. A few of the apps that we've talked about have that approach. I think Slack is the most notable one. You can go to the App Store and just download Slack. Installs just like it's a normal native app. And if you didn't tell somebody, and certainly if they weren't a developer, probably never know that it's an Electron app. So again, everything is also available just by doing a direct disk install if that's your thing as well. Beyond that, there are a couple of other things that Electron can do to really make your life easier. For example, auto-updating. So once you have deployed your app, there are a couple of services available where you can specify different versions and then tell your Electron app how to check for those versions. In this case, what I'm missing here is actually setting up the update detection system, checking with the URL, seeing if there's an available download, that kind of thing. But ultimately, you call check for updates, and then it checks for updates. And if you've actually seen, for those of you that have used Atom, I'm a little bit lazy and did an update today, which turned out to be a good thing. It's a squirrel down here, super cute. This means there's an update available. And in fact, Atom uses the exact same code that you'd be able to use in your own Electron app. So I click this, and then it gives me a nice update dialog. It says that my permissions are denied, which is everyone's favorite error ever. But normally, what you would expect to see here is, oh, there's a new version available, click to download, Electron takes care of the rest. It hits the server, downloads the binaries, restarts the app, swaps out all of the app resources, that kind of thing. So super, super helpful to have that in there as well. All right, one last thing I want to show is up to this point we've kind of used mostly sort of tech demo-y stuff. I want to share a side project that I've actually been working on for 8 years now, I think, off and on. It's definitely one of those that Chris mentioned about, no one's ever going to see it. Guess what? You guys get to see it. So, any Dungeons and Dragons players out there? I got half.
A few times.
Okay. So I do this a lot. I play D&D a lot. And as you may have come to expect, things like immersion is very important to me. It's why all of my icons are very nicely manicured. I had to make most of those, by the way, because people do not know how to make good icons. But one thing I like to do for my players is provide a nice immersive atmosphere for them when they're playing. So if they're in a dungeon, it sounds like a dungeon. So this is an Electron app that does that. It's got a couple of different features to it, but more or less what happens is you come in here to the different sections, pick some sounds that you want to hear. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't think so. Nope, no audio. Oh, wait. There we go. It's playing on here. Yeah? Okay. So you do that, and then you add some of these things, add some of this, add some wind gusts, all to make whatever atmospheric environment you're trying to work with for people. You can also group them into previous things. But all of this is an Electron, and actually Ember Electron as well. So some of the big challenges with this one was file system access. These files are massive. I ran into some really interesting issues getting Ember to, or not even Ember, but just JavaScript, to cache some of these files that are sometimes 100, 200 meg in size. So that was kind of an interesting one. And then obviously the general data access. Right now everything's in local storage. I'm hoping to shift to PouchDB at some point. But a couple of things that I wanted to call out to you. First of all, there's no title bar. It looks very much like a native app. All of these things are available with different Electron configurations. You can say, don't show the default title bar, I'll bring my own. We also have a nice about screen with a custom icon that I've provided because, of course, I did. There's also, it's hard to see, but there's a copyright here as well. A lot of this came from the config file that we saw earlier. And so all of this happened because of Electron. Like the Ember stuff is almost secondary, though there's also some cool stuff here, I think. But a lot of this is simply normal Ember Electron stuff and Electron itself. And again, unless you knew any better, probably, at least I hope you can't necessarily tell that this is not a native app, basically a glorified web page. But it's definitely possible to do some really fantastic stuff with it. Again, I draw your attention to all of the apps that we've seen so far. Atom, tremendously customizable, super fast, really like feature rich. Hyper, which is the terminal that I use here, also really awesome. Also no title bar too. This is apparently a common thing these days, is getting rid of normal title bars. The Slack stuff, Rocket Chat, Microsoft Teams, all of the other examples, and there's a not comprehensive list, but it's a decent list on the Electron site that has a number of examples of apps. You really, in some cases, just cannot tell that they're not native. And yet, you can use the tools and techniques that you already know in order to build these things. So with that, I'll put up a couple of resources. Electronjs.org is the base site for this open source project. Definitely check it out. It's built by GitHub and a number of contributors. It was actually released alongside Atom when they were both open sourced 3-4 years ago. Emberelectron.js.org is another great site if you're looking for more details on Ember Electron specifically. Also, a slight tangent, they've registered js.org to a sort of open source friendly organization. If you have a project, you can put yours at whatever your project is, .js.org, which is pretty cool. So do that too. Electron Forge itself, I couldn't get it to work without the www, which is why it's up there. But check that out. If you're looking to do things like pushing directly to app stores, you need to worry yourself a little bit more with certificates, things of that nature. Check that site out for configuration details. Beyond that, I think that's all I had today. Thank you very much. I've got, I think, plenty of time for questions if anyone has any. Yes?
Actually, 2 questions.
Sure. You get one.
I'm going to squeeze everything into one. So can you select different versions of Node.js? And if you want to use Node 9 with a single weight, can you do that? One question, let's squeeze. Can you use Babel or customize the build process as well?
Okay, sure. So part one of your one-part question was, can you use different versions of Node? It is possible to build against different versions of Node. The Electron runtime itself is built against a very specific version. In fact, let me bring up the Electron site real quick. And we'll also test the Wi-Fi here. It should be all right. The Wi-Fi is fine. It just gives me permission errors, apparently. But when you come to the Electron site, right below the little hero banner up here, you can see the current version of Electron as well as the version of Node it's built against. It is possible to change that. The default tools that we've talked about today assume that you're using whatever version of Node Electron expects. That does not, however, preclude you from using Ember's normal build process, which takes me to your second question, to modify things such as async await. So can you use async await? Yes. You can use the Babel transform that puts in the regenerator runtime and gets all of that goodness in play. Right now, because it's on Node 8, you can't use native async await, but you can still use any kind of Ember build process, any of the normal things like that. I typically use a lot of Babel plugins, Sass for the CSS, Ember engines if that's your thing, Ember component CSS, like any number of those normal add-ons will let you have control over a lot of that. That said, most of those don't touch the node process itself. So for example, in the examples, we didn't use the new import so-and-so syntax, we used the require syntax. The node side doesn't go through the normal Ember process, so it won't work quite the same way. You can still hook up your own build process next to it, and basically spit out the main file, and then have Electron pick it up from there. It starts getting a little process heavy at that point. So normally I just kind of stick to async await and stuff that I can transpile with Babel, basically. Does that answer your questions? Yeah, definitely. Cool. Both of them? Okay. Other questions? Yes?
Electron is generally considered a very, very heavy tool, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on its performance in general compared to, say, the native app.
Compared to what?
A native app.
Yes. So the question was, Electron is considered pretty heavy. Questions about performance, that kind of thing. So it is definitely heavy file size. Some of these examples that we just built out, I mean, it does really not very much at all, and yet it's already 139 meg in size. So definitely not super lightweight. Keep that in mind if that's a constraint for you. I personally have not had any runtime performance issues with it. Especially with sort of the async nature, you can typically work around those with a cleverly placed loading indicator. Even the app that I showed with all of the audio, the worst that I've encountered is maybe a 100-second delay while the browser loads up the sound file and gets it ready to play. I'm not sure that that's the absolute heaviest thing that you'd throw at it, but that's kind of the worst performance that I've seen. I built a couple of these things that have WebGL in them, smooth as butter, like no problems whatsoever, 60 frames per second, all that good stuff. It's still based on the Chrome rendering engine, so it's still pretty fast. There are a couple of things that it can't do. I'd encourage you to check out the Electron site for more details, namely things that Chrome does not include in the Chrome rendering package, but are add-on packages. Electron only uses the Chrome rendering package. But generally speaking, I've had no significant performance issues. Other questions? Yes?
Sorry, is there any kind of support for hot code reloading or updates without having to actually pull down a new executable?
So any supports for hot code reloading, presumably like after deploy time?
After deploy,
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know, you missed a semicolon. Something trivial that would cause your app to break in some fashion. But
Definitely. So it is definitely possible. The kind of concern there, which is sort of the same with a lot of hot reloading stuff, is it's another potential attack vector. Like you're basically pulling down code and just sort of trusting that it's all okay. Once you've addressed those, it is definitely possible. There's nothing built in with Electron, but at the same time, it's a accessible package that you can modify at runtime. So you can open up your package, poke in some new JavaScript, HTML, CSS, whatever, close it back up. We mentioned the ASAR format earlier. That's a little bit harder to do that with because all of that stuff is sort of compiled, if you will, and then decompressed at runtime. And so it's not super easy, if it's even possible now that I think about it, to modify the contents of that. You do things like your hash wouldn't match and then the app might fail to load entirely. So it is a definite possibility. I'd say you will have to do some planning ahead of time to, for example, not archive the JavaScript that you might want to hot update. But going along with that is maybe some performance issues at runtime because you'd have to parse that every time. So, good question. Was there one in the back? Yes.
Just a question around how close this is to a website or an app or whatever. What does user analytics and user tracking and kind of knowing how people actually use your Electron app look like?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just the same as a web app, or is it slightly different, or can you just use those tools?
Got it. So the question was, how does user analytics work with it? Is it the same as a website? Is it more like a native app? I'd say by and large, it's the same as any normal Ember app. I would suggest looking into things that rely less on page views, which is a normal, like if you've done anything with Ember and analytics, you probably aren't looking for page views because you only get one. But anything that looks for like events, things like that, you can absolutely send directly to the analytics provider of your choice. It's still a web browser. You can still make XML HTTP requests, so you can push anything up to Google Analytics if you want. There's that super easy Google Analytics plugin for Ember that pushes up page views every time that the route changes. Mixpanel is another good option because they tend to look a little more toward events instead of page views. But any of those things that you'd normally use on the web would absolutely still work here. The only exception is if you're trying to track things that would exist outside of Ember. So in the main loop, if you will, file system access. The little example I showed has a couple of menu bar things. Actually, let me just bring it back up. There we go. So once you've opened the app once and you click away from this welcome screen, it's like, where do you go? So I added a help option to go back to the welcome guide. This type of thing might not be easily tracked by Ember, but you can definitely look at that inside the main code, send an event to your Ember, or have the Ember actually trigger an event, have the Ember app listen for that, and then fire off your own analytics stuff at that point. So I've not really needed to do anything more than what I could already do with the web. Great questions. Anything else? All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. Again, there's some swag over there if you want, and have a good one.